Hi, I'm Paul Winston, Chief Operating Officer of Insurance Thought Leadership, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to the webinar today, Driving Digital Agility, How Insurance Carriers Can Deliver Transformative Changes. Today's webinar is produced in partnership with Connected Insurance Conference. And today, over the past 5-6 years, there's been a huge change in the insurance industry and the number of companies that are embracing technology and innovation, reinventing how they do business, creating new products, and engaging with customers in new ways. And I'm excited to be able to talk today with 3 people who are helping transform their organizations and to learn how they're doing it. I'm going to go in alphabetical order, introduce Drew Aldrich. Drew is Managing Director of American Family Ventures. Raquel Santana is Vice President of E-Business Strategy and Execution for the Travelers. And Scott Steele is Chief Marketing Officer for Church Mutual Insurance Company. To kick off the webinar, I'm going to invite each of the panelists to share a little bit about their roles and the focus of their efforts. And then I'll go through a couple questions with our panelists, and then afterwards, we definitely invite you, our audience, to share your questions using the panel, and we will tackle those in the second half of the webinar. So to kick things off, Drew, tell us a little bit about your role and focus of your innovation efforts.
Sure, thanks. Yeah, so as mentioned, I'm Drew. I'm one of the managing directors of AmFam Ventures. We are a venture capital fund, and for most of the history of the fund since 2013, American Family, the large insurance carrier, was our only investor in the fund. Recently, we've kind of made an interesting kind of evolution, and now AmFam is still our anchor investor, but we've got a couple other insurance companies and insurance entities that invest within our fund as well. And so our whole mission is to find and invest in the best startups that are transforming insurance, and then share those learnings back to our LPs, back to our investors. And so that's been our primary mission. We've been doing it since 2013.
Great, thank you. Raquel?
Good afternoon. So Raquel Santana. I am right now Vice President Digital Enablement, and so I focus in a lean enterprise group that's really focused on delivering digital capabilities to market, partnering with our line of business overall.
Great, and Scott?
Thanks. Thanks for inviting me to be part of today's discussion. Just a little bit about Church Mutual. For over 120 years, we provided protection for organizations that serve others. That's churches, religious institutions of all denominations, schools, nonprofit, for-profit, human services, senior living communities, and camps. Particularly interested in this, we've made innovation a cornerstone for our growth. And we do believe it's a continuous investment. It's something we're committed to, and we do it so that we can better serve our customers.
Excellent. So to kick off questions, I think just sort of a foundational question is, I'd love to hear from each of you a little bit about, within your organization, what's the focus of your innovation efforts? So is it internal efficiency gains and reduced expenses? Is it improved customer satisfaction, development of new products, services, all of the above, none of the above? Drew, do you want to start off? You talked about the mission of AmFam Ventures and American Family when it created the fund. What was the initial goal, or what is the goal today? What kind of innovations are you trying to drive?
Yeah, sure. And I mean, I've set a little bit of context that my guess is everybody here already knows, but back when AmFam Ventures was created in 2013, there was about 270 million of venture capital dollars flowing into insurance. Last year, it was about 4.1 billion. So that's about a 60% CAGR. There's been about 11 billion invested into startups in the space over the last 5 years, and that's a huge change, and it's causing kind of important reflections on the industry. It's causing changes in customer expectations, and the goal is to be a part of that ecosystem, both from a kind of participant in the broader ecosystem. We deal with lots of companies that we don't invest in, and then to find the particular companies that we think can yield a really great financial return and have kind of interesting strategic value back to our investors. And so the whole mission is to find a way to participate actively and learn as much as possible about this very kind of really unique time in insurance. And I think there's a general sense within both American Family and the venture fund that this is the new normal, that we're kind of not going to go back to the world of kind of little outside pressure, that this kind of constant pressure in the form of dollars headed towards interesting startups is the way of the future, and we need to be a part of that to make sure that we're kind of one of the technology haves in the future rather than one of the technology have-nots.
And Raquel, in Travelers, what is, you talked about digital enablement, but broadly, what is the focus of Travelers' innovation efforts?
When we think about innovation for us, I think it's, broader. So I know you mentioned the efficiency, customer satisfaction, markets, and I'd say it's all of that and more, right? I think that we know the one constant will be change. And I think it's for us to make sure that we are able to adapt in an ever-changing environment and value chain right now within the insurance industry, that we're prepared for that and that we can move as things are moving. And also to get comfortable with being in the gray spaces, right? That we know things will continue to change, and how well are we positioned for that, and to feel like the comfortable in uncomfortable situations is where I think we want to make sure that we continue to grow.
And Scott, Church Mutual, what is your focus? What is the goal of innovation efforts as you see it?
Well, when we speak about innovation, we really have two areas of focus. Our first is really taking a look at what we can deploy from a technology perspective to and for our customers that will help prevent and mitigate disruption to their missions. For example, if a house of worship were to incur water damage, they wouldn't be able to hold their services, which impacts their congregation, their finances, their community, and more. And so we look for technologies that would help mitigate that so that they're not disrupted, that they don't have to make a claim, and it's a win-win for both. A good example is like our CM sensor program. It alerts customers when cold temperatures or water are detected. A lot of our customers may not be in the building every day, so something may be happening and they're not there. They'd get an alert about maybe a pipe that's burst or water or temperature, and they can get over there and take care of the problem a lot quicker rather than discovering it a couple days later and having a lot of damage done. And then our second is what we can do to make it easier to do business with us, the customer experience. This could be technologies we're implementing, such as a new policy admin system, claim system, putting in a self-service functionality on our website. These are all initiatives that's going to help us within our ability to serve our customers. And it could be optimizing processes, like you said, led by our continuous improvement team. They can help us control costs and increase productivity and provide faster and better response to our customer, things like that.
So as all of you sort of in your organizations focus on these new ways of serving your customers and changing how, in some ways, I think both Drew and Raquel, you kind of said the same thing. It's changing sort of the way it's becoming, a key insurance skill. Innovation maybe becomes as integral to a company as, say, actuarial or underwriting or claims or whatever it might be. And that's a big new thing for the insurance industry. And so what kind of stumbling blocks or obstacles or challenges have you encountered along the way? What are some of the biggest hurdles to adopting this new way of approaching how insurance serves its customers and defines itself? Raquel, you talked about sort of
Yeah.
helping people manage change. So I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, so I think for us, it's really the biggest hurdle is cultural shift that we have to encounter, right? We're insurance, so we're, risk adverse, we manage risk, right? So I think we're very tied off onto the known factors and data. And I think when you start talking about innovation, you have to start doing things that are outside of exactly known. That's what you're going after, right? So you're going to start with a hypothesis and ultimately answer something, but it can be very different when you start to learn than you started out with. And that's different for us, and that's not completely embedded in our DNA. So it's something we're working towards. I mean, in the past, we used to have very project-based CBAs that were very finite, and now we have to really focus on more holistic outcomes, right? It might not be here's the 3% retention number, but it might be exactly tied. We're going to improve customer experience and two other components that will impact new business and retention. So I think just moving away from that very focused, project-based accounting that we used to do and having a more holistic view as we go into it and really looking at the learnings that we have are just some of that change in culture.
And how I'd be curious, as part of that, how the message is being communicated. If it's the organization internal adoption and embracing this, are you running into any challenges, or are people sort of really getting behind this?
So I think like our leadership, I think it starts at the top, right? I think our leadership is very passionate about it. We think about our perform and transform agenda, starting with our CEO, Alan, who's really been pushing that agenda for a couple of years now to say, while we still have to run the business, we also have to transform at the same time. So I do definitely think there's buy-in. And and it's being shared there. I think also though the challenges become, we have potentially traditional finances, right? That you want to think about how we do this and we execute in a certain way. And those are the things we start to say, like, well, we're not going to tie it out in that way. We're going to say these 5 things might lead to an outcome, and it's not going to be a one-to-one line item. That's a change. I think a lot of times you want to know the outcome before we invest completely. And we might want to say we're going to give a certain amount of invest to learn, which is different than we've done in the past. So I think those are things that we're moving through right now.
And Scott, how about Church Mutual? Have you encountered any challenges or surprises as you've moved in this direction?
I think similar to Raquel, the cultural and behavior changes are a challenge. Being an old company, we have a lot of folks that have been here with us 30, 40 years, and helping them and gaining their buy-in and understanding why we're making these changes and why they're important is extremely important to help lead to our success. So that's one aspect that we face just the same as others do with the internal behavior. We have one of the things that we've identified in addition to the top-down buy-in is we've really identified that the managers and supervisor levels are critical to our success, because those are the people that interact with their employees every single day. They see them, they work with them, and by having them buy into the what we're doing and really understand it and are able to communicate it in a regular manner, just helps alleviate some of the concerns and fears that people might have about change, and also helps them understand how they can contribute to that and be part of it. So that's been a big part of the things that we've had to address. And then also just identifying and committing the resources to change. It's one thing to say we want to do something, it's put everything into place, but as a company, we're doing many other things at the same time. So really prioritizing what initiatives we're going to move forward with, and then once we prioritize them, really making sure that we commit to them to get them done in a timely manner. So those are probably the 2 biggest things.
And Drew, you've got a slightly different focus, but if I think about the challenges that you might encounter as a CVC, is when AmFam Ventures was founded, the novelty of startups focused on insurance issues was still very fresh and surprising. Now there are thousands of companies. How has your sort of focus changed, or any particular challenges? And now we've got to change how we evaluate these opportunities and these startups.
Yeah, a couple thoughts on this. So one challenge that we see. So I was going to start by answering from our portfolio or from the startups perspective. One of the challenges we see quite a bit is that there's often an entry point into a carrier through an innovation team, and what we find is there's really you need to know the specifics of the way that innovation team works inside the large carrier, where there are some that are extremely effective and there are some that are ineffective. And what we find is it actually can be very counterproductive for a startup to go into an organization through an innovation team if that's one of the ones that's kind of more ineffective. And you find those when the innovation team, and one of the challenges stem from kind of the innovation team not having P&L ownership. And because they don't have P&L ownership, they don't really have a deep budget. So they might have a small budget for them to get POCs approved, but that doesn't get you anywhere, because you get the POC approved, it's successful, but then the head of innovation needs to go and convince the head of the P&L to buy their research or to buy that POC, or and if that relationship isn't strong, which the startup has no real influence on, it actually could be a pretty big detriment and can wall you off from that carrier for a year or more. And so that we find this navigating carriers is often very carrier by carrier specific. It's kind of individual specific. It's the relationships at the senior level, which is a real challenge, because it's very hard for carriers to optimize. And how everyone wants to bring in the best companies and to kind of cut through any internal strife or politics, and it's actually really quite difficult. The other thing that we often find is appetite for bringing in new companies can be very different depending on the cost to set up a pilot. If the infrastructure inside of a large company, carrier or broker or whatever, is challenging, and thus it is expensive just to set up a pilot, it becomes a real hindrance, because that problem is typically correlated to, one, it's expensive, two, you often don't get great data out of it because the business intelligence tools aren't kind of directly connected. So these are actually like really, really, really big challenges. And what we see is that carriers that have invested in solving these problems are seeing bigger dividends in the speed at which they pilot, in the effectiveness of those pilots, and the speed at which those effective pilots get turned into kind of BAU, business as usual kind of processes. And one of the things I think about a lot is this kind of increasing acceleration of systematic improvement. So groups that have kind of efficient internal processes to bring in companies, efficient IT systems in order to quickly evaluate and run tests, they can run 10 tests a year, whereas someone who doesn't have those systems can run 1 or 2. And you start forward looking 3, 4, 5 years, you have a situation where one group has done kind of 5 or 6 tests and the other has done 50, 60, 100. And I think you start running to kind of, I think that could get really impactful pretty quickly and very hard to fix if you're behind the curve. So that's like one kind of very macro thing. I know AmFam, our largest investor, American Family, they've spent a huge amount of time thinking about this problem and how to solve it. And I mean, I think that's the only reason why we can be effective with them, is that we see about 1,500 companies a year, and some number of those we send into AmFam or some of our other carrier investors to see if they want to partner with them. And only with an effective process can you kind of handle a significant amount of volume coming from a group like ours. So anyway, that's kind of one piece. I would say the other one, if you're just the broader question of what are the new problems we see that we didn't see a couple years ago, back before 2015, when no one cared about insurance and in the venture world, the problems were no one would give any love for the very few startups we would find, and people didn't understand it. The investors didn't understand it. The entrepreneurs didn't really understand it. Now we have the flip where there's an enormous amount of interest in this space. I mean, just unbelievable. We have new entrepreneurs coming from outside the industry. They're pouring in. We have people who wanted to be entrepreneurs who were inside the industry but never had a kind of low risk way of doing it. And now there's so much capital that you've got a good idea. You're from inside the industry. You can get funded. And so what all that means is that the competition is much higher. So in 2013, I think AmFam was the first. Before AmFam, I was at AXA, and I built AXA Ventures for AXA, and that was about 2015. So I think there were 3 or 4 specifically insurance funds back then, and now I think there's 40 or 50. So it's all about. In fact, that's kind of why we made why we took on new investors into our fund. It was all about can we keep on the cutting edge, because the competition is just much harder. The other venture capitalists we see who are generalists, they now understand insurance in a way they didn't a couple years ago, and now there's just way more insurance specific funds, which has been, I mean, I think really great for the industry, really great for the space. It just makes our job a lot harder.
So that's interesting, Drew, because I think you identified something that I know at ITL we see a lot, is that challenge of you've got the innovation team that's tasked with evaluating startups and their solutions, but when it comes to that handoff to the business unit that actually has to manage or launch or add this to their P&L, it sort of underscores the need to move beyond sort of the innovation mindset to starting to put in processes and structures in place and getting good at them to actually manage that pipeline and process, I guess. Scott, any thoughts on that? You raised your hand.
I just wanted to focus in on one thing that Drew said about having the confidence and the ability to look 3 to 5 years down the road when your company's doing something like that is a critical factor, because with some of these innovations or some of these things that you implement, you can go through proof of concept, you can work through everything, but at the end of the day, you've got to see it work. And with our innovation lab here, they go through the testing, they test the ideas, but building that credibility with these ideas is also key, because it's hard to take that leap from the investment to the reality. But our company did that with the sensors, where we went in with an idea. We'd seen it work in other industries, so we wanted to try it in ours, and it's more than paid for itself over the 2 years, and has really now given us the impetus we need to take it more broadly and operationalize it across. But it's that leap of faith from saying, okay, everything shows this is going to work. Now let's invest in it, let's stick with it, and let's do it. And it's critical that companies, are in it for the long run, and not just try to do things and then it's not working right away and they get out. They've got to commit to it.
I think, we've kind of touched on, and we could do a deep dive on any of these topics, but we touched on a little bit of the internal shift and cultural changes needed to enable innovation and transformation. We've talked a little bit about the external sources of innovation, these tech startups, and what we bring and how we work with them. I think if we might shift a little bit, there's another key important stakeholder here, and that's the customer. And maybe Raquel, I'll start with you. How do you think about the customer, and how do you basically, I guess, understand what the customer's needs are and how well you're serving them with some of these innovations that you're bringing to market, and how they're being received and whether they're moving the needle for you?
Yeah, so as we think about the customer, one, we kind of define customer broadly, right? Because we want to think about our policyholders, our agents, right? As well as times, we want to keep on thinking broadly and think about even our employee base, right? As part of that, component of it. So when we talk about what are some of our main goals and other things and points of view around that, I think, we want to think about anticipate where they're going. So I think one of the things we say as consumers, we're growing accustomed to companies providing us with services that we want and receiving it where and when we want it. And as companies, these customer expectations are driving the way we do work, not only to respond to the request, but anticipating their needs today and in the future. And an important thing for us that we've kind of kept in mind is that one big shift that we've seen from the insurance industry, probably like 10 years ago, we compare ourselves to another insurance company, right, about customers' experience. And you talk about whether there's friction in the buy-in or claim experience. And we've really moved away from that because other industries are shaping our customers' expectations. So to give you an example for like that, we'd say, talk about banking, right? We talk about banking hours in the past. That concept has kind of gone away because you don't ever need to go to a brick and mortar bank anymore. You can deposit online checks, you can move money around with friends and family, right? And you can pay your bills. And the same thing with retail shopping. And you talk about, I can have full transparency within the process of where my items are, when it's shipped, when I'll receive them. And the reason that shapes for us in insurance what we need to do with those customer expectations. So if you think about your onboarding process for a customer, we need to keep them informed where they are in the process, what's outstanding, because they've grown used to that. And so as we think about that, we're just really sensitive to really bringing in more design thinking into our process and embedding that outside in look and really trying to meet the customer where they are, right? And so as we think about whether it might be doing things with Alexa skills or other components out there, that's the other part. Like, they don't always want to come to our websites to do things. And so how do we integrate into their ecosystem?
Scott, you've also done some work focused on the customer journey and where Church Mutual serves their needs. Any thoughts on your perspective?
Yeah, with regard to the Church Mutual, we are in the midst of a digital transformation. Some things we've completed, some of them we're in the middle of, and some of them we're now just kicking off. So that's part of the reason that I'm excited to be part of it, is that we are being part of building something is a lot of fun and very challenging. With regard to that digital transformation, it really comes down to, and I think Raquel did touch on this, is what do our customers really want? What do they need? What do they expect? What are table stakes? And then what can we do beyond table stakes to really differentiate ourselves from others with our technology? Some of the stuff we're doing is complete table stakes. We're putting in a new portal system for self-service. We're updating our policy admin, as I was mentioning earlier, things like that. And then taking a look at the things that are happening. I mean, whether however you want to put it, our weather is getting more severe. Storms are getting more severe and more damaging, things that are going on. So we're also taking a look at what's going on out there and how can we address these? How can we get ahead of these? Whether it be, we ran a pilot in California last year where we hired trucks and made alerts so that if wildfires got near some of our customers, they would get an alert. And then if it got closer, we dispatched people out there to help them clean it up. And if it got real close, we actually sprayed them with a gel to prevent the fire. Once again, it was a pilot that proved and paid for itself. So it's taking a look at what our customers are facing, what's changing in the world, what we need to do to play and stay relevant in the marketplace. And I think the point about our partners, our brokers, our employees is key as well. They all play a part in this transformation, and understanding what they're doing and what they're facing just really helps us, throughout the entire customer journey.
Great. We're starting to get some questions from the audience, and I would remind our audience to please use the question tool to shoot those to us. Before I shift to the audience, one question I've got for the panel is, we talk about technology, and you just gave a great example, Scott. Are there specific technologies? We're in a webinar talking that's affiliated with the Connected Insurance event. Are there particular technologies that you see have an especially large potential impact on, building better customer relationships or serving your customers? You've talked to, actually, Scott, you've talked about a couple of technologies you've deployed. The water sensors was another. So I don't want to. So is there anything else that you see that really shows promise?
Well, Raquel mentioned the digital assistants, the Siris, the Google Homes, the Alexas. those are very interesting because right now, they're primarily B2C type of situation. There's not a lot of stuff going on with them, but I'm watching more and more insurance companies start to leverage them. I think that that's a technology in 5 years that's going to be pretty relevant in our industry, that people can say, hey Google, help me pay my insurance premium. I think that those types of things are going to happen. I need to make a claim. As people look for more and more convenience and they interact more with digital. I just yesterday was getting a new snowblower. I live in Wisconsin, and I'm looking at these new mowers that are working, and I'm thinking, my gosh, what's that going to change? So it's going so fast that we have to be open to what we're seeing and not think that'll never happen. Whoever thought people would watch movies on their phone? We have to keep ahead of it and keep seeing down the road and be open to these little things that at the time may not seem important, but say, you know what, this could really have an impact, and take the time to look into them. So, I think that this assistant aspect of things is really going to be a big impact on us.
And Raquel, any thoughts that
Yeah.
you have?
Sure, absolutely. I think that there's probably two big spaces. I think one thing, any technology around data, right? I think data is going to be king in the industry. I think the more we can tailor personalized experience with relevant content, then we can really engage our customers. So I think it's really going to be one of those big enablers. And the other space that I think has a tremendous amount of promise, and we're going to all be watching, is going to be, AI and machine learning. I think those things are going to have a huge impact on companies moving forward. Obviously, it's going to be, the ability to leverage that data I talked about initially is going to be key. But when we think about anticipating customers' needs, the potential of what AI could do in the future is tremendous. So I think that's going to be something that continues to, define our industry over time.
Raquel, I was sure you were going to mention Hover, because Travelers just put out I think it was a press release 2 days ago about, given that they're an investment that we've made, I'll rep it, but Travelers just put out a great PR release about it. It's an amazing piece of technology to Raquel's point about AI. It's a phone-based app that you can take a couple pictures of your home from multiple different directions, and in a matter of minutes you get back a fully rendered 3D model, digital 3D model of the home, complete with building materials and incredibly accurate, which is just unbelievably powerful technology for an insurer. So Raquel, I was sure you were going to mention it.
Yeah, obviously, for us in a claim processing and what we're going to do with that, that's going to be also, obviously you're right, something that's really big in for us right now.
There's Paul, do you want me to jump in with some other ones?
Go for it, Drew. Yep.
So glad I got to do the shout out for Hover. There's and that one's, I think classic like future tech coming to the world. It's really like peering into the future, but there's a whole bunch of other kind of less kind of eye-popping, but could be just as impactful or more impactful. Things like there's a company in Columbus called Bold Penguin, which is just trying to make the small business commercial quoting binding process far more efficient for agents and carriers. So this is, kind of the anti-disruptor, where it's all about how do you tech enable the agency force? How do you help large carriers improve their whole processes in order to improve efficiency, in order to improve binding rates? So we see a ton of stuff like that, and we look at stuff across that spectrum, from the heavy AI, kind of really futuristic, to the kind of nuts and bolts. How do you just do really important improvements into the process of quoting and binding insurance?
Well, those are all really good points. I think that the sky's the limit in terms of technology, but as panelists, you hit on both technology for engagement, tech for loss prevention, new sources of data, new tools to analyze and make sense of that data. So very interesting. I'm going to shift a little bit. We've got questions coming in from the audience. Drew, one question is, you mentioned that American Family Ventures had added additional insurance investors. Can you share what some of those other insurance organizations are in your fund?
No, not quite.
Okay.
We're under some. We're there are regulatory considerations about what we can kind of talk to or can't talk to, but so unfortunately, no, I can't talk about that quite right now.
Understood. Another question. This is a good one. So how do we measure innovation? What are the factors? What are the metrics you're using to measure how well you're doing, how well your organization is, accomplishing some of its innovation goals and moving towards where you want to be? Any thoughts on that, Raquel or Scott?
So I'd say that we're still actually maturing in the space, right, in terms of how we measure purely innovation, because I think we're tying innovation, with other things around customer experience. And so sometimes we've been spending a little bit more of our time about, actually saying, here's what we're doing with, risk, tolerance, experience overall, and then innovation's a subset of that. So we haven't really pulled it out completely as its own set of key metrics, and how we're doing that. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
On our end, I think, sometimes it comes down to how you define innovation. It's a pretty big word. I mean, innovation could be something brand new, or it could be something that exists that applies to an industry that it hasn't necessarily played in. With Church Mutual, we're just starting up our innovation lab. We started it about a year ago, and we're working through how we're going to define the success metrics. I mean, we've had good success with the programs that we've implemented that are loss control. We've seen good returns on those. We have, the customers love them. So we kind of have the baseline on how we can measure loss control. But as we go into more detailed things or other areas, from the marketing perspective, the customer experience is critical. How are we going to measure that? And those metrics, along with innovation, is still being defined. We're looking at what's going on, what we have. We're developing our baseline metrics, because at the end of the day, we do need to show that it helps the company, but more importantly, it helps the policyholder. So we're still early in those stages as well.
Paul, I have one quick thought on that as well, if you want.
Sure,
we
please.
In almost every startup we look at that is consumer facing, we look at a metric called NPS, Net Promoter Score. It's a one question survey. It's kind of really easy to implement, and given that I think all the panelists have talked about the importance of customer experience, and I think that's really true. And so I know we've been thinking a lot about kind of how to blend these kind of metrics that we use to judge startups and their likely effectiveness with their customers with the metrics that insurers use. And on NPS, which I think is interesting, is you could, in theory, kind of drive up NPS with high cost measures. You could, I don't know, you could add CSR reps to cut down wait times and things like. There are probably ways expensively that you can improve NPS. And I think what would be interesting is some sort of combined metric of NPS and an expense ratio, or something where you how do you kind of the real where the rubber hits the road is, can you actually improve the customer experience while not costing you more money, kind of by being more efficient? And I think that's extremely hard, but would be really, I think, interesting.
So using a change in your Net Promoter Score, NPS, and using that as a metric to say we've moved the needle, we're improving customer satisfaction. And
yeah, but with even the added level of difficulty of not only can you improve Net Promoter Score, can you do it while you don't increase your expense ratio? I mean, I think it's a really tough challenge, but would be one of the things that I think is an interesting thing to look at.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right, and it becomes complicated because you could also say it's making sure you keep your expenses low, but you could also say, like, is it actually improving your NPS and you're seeing an increase in your retention, right? So it is a mix of metrics that when you want to think about that.
Another question from the audience, as a small carrier, what is a good entry point for digital claims transformation? Any thoughts on that?
I think that if you're looking specific, I think it's great to have one specific goal, right? Digital claims transformation rather than innovation across the whole company, right? I think that's like a good first step. And then I would parallel path two things. One is I would look at external vendors and I would assign some sort of senior-ish reporting to us, given that the premise of this question was a smaller carrier. So some sort of seniors team with clout inside of the organization do a bit of a deep dive on tech options out there, right? It would be super easy to get intros to. I mean, you could reach out to me and you could get an intro to probably 5 or 6 different interesting claims companies, and then there's probably some very, very large players out there too. And I would run a bit of a process where you see kind of 5 or 6 startups, you see a couple kind of incumbent technology providers, see what they're offering, and then the second component would be do a real honest assessment of capabilities internally to ingest this type of work, and based on that assessment, pick one of these providers and go deep with it, and don't get distracted by everything else. Just do this one thing and see how that goes, and see if you guys can culturally absorb it, if you can do it in kind of without costs exploding and that sort of thing. That would be my suggestion.
I'd like to add to that too is what you do before you talk to any kind of a supplier or partner is really to really do a good job of defining your requirements. We require a pretty extensive requirements document that goes in detail on what we're really trying to achieve, what we need, what we understand we need, because that helps when we might be working with a solutions provider. They can say, okay, you need this, but we can also do that. They can add on it. It's also very important to understand the impact that this is going to have on your company, internal stakeholders, partners, things like that. Get their input, and then understand what your priority is and your commitment to this is. Something like this can drag out for years if it becomes distracted by other things that are going on in the company. So make sure that if you are going to go through this, I agree with Drew. It's great to have that focus. This is what we're going to do. But then given the time and the resources and the commitment, be sure that you can do that, because companies get distracted with things that become priorities and take over, and projects or initiatives that should have taken 1 or 2 years end up taking 5. So, just do a really good job of your requirements, understand and involve your key stakeholders, and make sure that you really understand where this fits in as a priority and a commitment to your company.
Great, thank you. Here's a question from the audience, and this is a good one. Can any of you share a digital transformation example where it did not work out and you had to move on and stay agile in the face of failure? We hear a lot about this sort of innovation mindset and fail fast, and that's certainly one of the cultural shifts that the insurance industry has to face. So any Scott or Raquel, any examples where we tried something, and how it didn't work out and how you moved beyond that?
I'll take that to start.
Mm-hmm.
We needed I'm not going to mention the project specifically, but we wanted to make a significant digital transformation. And we thought that we could manage and run it internally and partner with someone to help us do it. But really, we can do this. We have a great IT team, so on and so forth, that can partner with them. As we got deeper into it, we realized that this was not the best solution, and that, this isn't what we do. This isn't what our strength is. We need to find the right partners to do this. So, one of the hardest things to do is when you do see a failure like that is to admit it, and then pivot. And we were able to do that, and now we partnered with someone that's, kicking butt for us, moving this thing forward, meeting our expectations, meeting our deadlines. So, the thing is really take a look at what you're good at and what you have the capabilities to do, and be honest with yourself. And I think that's one of the biggest things is sometimes you think, oh, we could do this ourselves. And then you get deep into it and you realize there's a reason there's companies that specialize in doing it.
Yeah, and for us at Travelers, I would say that, what we did one time, for one of our innovation efforts, we, launched a new product, and I wouldn't say, call it a failure. I think that was actually what our opportunity and learning was out of it, is that we launched a new product, a lot quicker than we ever have before in terms of turnaround time and speed to market, and figured out how to accelerate our normal process in a really positive way. Now, it didn't pick up all of the volume that we would have wanted in terms initially, but we actually challenged ourselves not to call it a failure, right, in terms of innovation, and say that, here are all the great things we learned. It was very laser focused to a very small segment, and that was intentional to a very, to a couple of states only, and and we learned from the process, so we didn't expand it out to other states. We left it where it was, and we took away, here are the things that we learned from the process, and to really not call it a failure, right? That it was a learning process for us, and we have to be willing to do this and know that we might not have exact outcomes that we expected, but that's okay if we actually have learned in the process around that.
Well, that makes a lot of sense, and being able to just, this is valuable learning, and particularly if you've got senior leadership support that, that's how we're going to get better at this. Drew, you talked early on about, the efficiency, companies getting more efficient at pilots and POCs, and part of that is making those evaluations, I think, more quickly if this particular technology or idea isn't going to work out. So let's move on and not tie everybody up. Are you seeing improvement in that regard as well?
I think we're seeing. I think a little bit. I think we're seeing a little bit of a tick up here because now we're a couple years into this process, and people have gone through iterations of their innovation or technology teams, and so I think we are, but it is still a very big challenge. I mean, right? The ideal situation is for P&L owners to be running their own innovation initiatives because they're the ones who control their own budget and they can determine, a full rollout but incentives are difficult because often, you are trying to do innovation to look more like 5 to 10 years out, and P&L owners often are looking, not for unreasonable reasons, more like 1 to 3 years out, and so you have to then rely on these kind of outside the P&L teams to do this work, or for partnerships teams, and it's just a very, very difficult problem, and it's not a generalizable problem. It's specific to every single company that's attempting to do something in this space, and it's all specific to the people who are running it, or the people who are in charge of it, the culture of the organization, the kind of capital capacity they have, and so it's just. I wish I could just be like, yeah, no, it's all getting better, and I think the main thing is that this is going to be an ongoing challenge. But I do think it is the challenge, right? It is like when you look back in 10 years, or 10 years from now, when people are looking back, I really do think there's going to be kind of technology winners and losers, and or haves and have-nots, and it is the work that was put in now. That will be the determinants of that. I think, waiting to learn these hard lessons that Scott and Raquel were talking about, for another couple of years will really put you behind, and could get quite challenging to kind of dig your way out of.
We've got a question from the audience addressed to Raquel, but Scott and Drew, you might also have some thoughts on this. It says, Raquel made an excellent point about no longer just looking at like industries and expanding to other industries in regard to customer experience. Can you elaborate a little bit more on the design thinking and how that impacts insurance industries in terms of anticipating customer needs and wants?
Yeah, so I mean, as we think about like design thinking, we kind of have to really put ourselves in the place of the customer, and so that's really started to like change our outlook, right? And I think there was a time, for example, so we would think about like spending a lot of investments on building our self-service portals, like even with our agents, like how do we build a destination? And we've really started to look at their journey completely, right? So we'd start from the time they onboard to all the way to renewal to their claims. And really, and for those, to be honest, those might feel like silos within our organization and how we're structured. And so it made it hard because we're not looking at the journey of the customer truly. And so we've really started to change that orientation and to really start off our initiatives in a different way, where we actually start with our design thinking up front, and even before we start trying to put like some level of scope and agenda out there, that we are testing that first before we even get to any phase of build, to just say like, hey, if we walk through this, how would that look? So I think at times you can have a single point of experience work really well if you don't see the full view all the way through. So you might have an onboarding experience that works really well, but it feels odd at claim processing. And you're like, wait, that what we did there worked for that point in time, but they had an expectation on us that a lot of that information carried through and it didn't, and that didn't feel good. So I think, we're really, shifting how we do that. And we're also, there's a point we thought about UX as the people who come in from user design, and they focus on that. And we're trying to say that everybody in our delivery cycles actually needs to have that mindset. So it could be from our product owners to our engineers, that they should all be thinking that way. And we're trying to really infuse that into the DNA.
Is design thinking something that you use at Church Mutual, Scott?
Yes, it is. But I kind of also, with the design thinking, but I also wanted to go back to the looking at the like industries for a moment, because that's critical. We do that quite a bit, because as a mid-sized carrier, we don't necessarily have the deep pockets that others have for some of the investments. So by keeping our eyes open on what other companies are doing and what they're innovating or what products they're putting out, it could be a consumer product. It doesn't even need to be a B2B, but by having that part of our process to see what else is going on out there, we can find gems out there that say, you know what, we could modify this for our customers. How would that work? The sensors is a perfect example. The wildfire is a perfect example. Both of those existed, but they weren't being used in the way we were able to use it within our industry. And it really comes down to, just as anticipating the customer needs and wants, is we realize that, from a need perspective, certain customers aren't going to be in their building, that there's going to be other issues that they're going to be facing, that, we have changeover in our industry from, older generation is now turning over to, younger generations. What are those younger generations going to want? What kind of communications, what kind of connection, what kind of information, what kind of expectations are they going to have? And by looking outside of our industry, we can definitely see things that are going on in others, saying, well, this could really apply to us. We need to start thinking this way as well.
Excellent. We have a question. What have you found most effective in convincing senior leadership in your company that a particular trend or technology, while seemingly early stage, is critical to creating, to embracing as part of your, future strategy? So you've had to convince senior leadership to take a chance on this new, interesting, opportunity. Any advice on making that argument?
I think tying it back to the business strategy has been, probably the most successful way to really demonstrate like how this, like here's what you want to attain, whether it's a 5 to 10 year plan. And if we don't move the needle on these things, here's how we cannot accomplish that. Like these are imperative for us to do in order to realistically achieve these goals. So I think tying it back to that business vision is one way. And I think in complement with that, I think tying it back to other companies that have really changed their models in significant ways. I mean, if you think about where, Domino's was at one point in terms of just, think about food industry, and like, half their workforce is actually more tech now, right? And innovation, how they're actually delivering their goods. Like, it's really changing where Microsoft has changed. So I think just even giving examples of people who've undergone like really significant change and how they've kind of come out on top and been prepared, for that movement, I think has been helpful.
I think one of the things too go ahead, Drew.
No, Scott, you go ahead.
I think, one of the things too to keep in mind is to appeal to both sides of the brain when speaking with senior leadership or the board. You've got the one side of the brain where you need to talk about the financial benefits, the investment, the expected return, how it's going to pay for itself or not pay for itself. What are the soft benefits, all those types of things, so that they can see that kind of value. And then there's the other side of the brain where we got to talk about where convincing them that this is important to our customers to meet their expectations. It's a value add that will differentiate us, that it can help in a lot of different ways. So, when talking to them or presenting to them, making sure that you're talking to both sides of the brain, because in my experience, I've had presentations where I focused on the financial, and it's like, yeah, but do customers even need this? What do they want? What are our customers saying? And so it's important to include the big picture holistically on how something like this can impact the company as well as our customers and also our future.
I think what Scott said makes a ton of sense. I guess my comment was going to be more about the one particular part of the brain, the kind of the more emotional side, because so my suggestion is you got to have the senior leadership meet the founder. And I know this is not possible every time, and I'm talking about specifically for startups, and there's lots of other groups out there that are not startups, and given that I'm a hammer, so I'm seeing everything as nails here as someone who only works with startups. So take all that as disclaimer, but not talking to the sales guy or anything else, but talking to the founder who can paint the picture for the senior executives is unbelievably impactful. In fact, that's what it's the speed of change that we find. This goes back to my comment about kind of working with innovation groups or working with partnership teams versus work with P&L heads. It's the difference between a 3-month process for a startup and a 2-year process, literally that long. If you can put the senior leader in the room with the guy who founded the company or the gal who founded the company, because it just gets so much more visceral. So they can express it and explain it and walk through the vision in such a clearer manner that really gets it on board. So I really suggest that we've seen so much more success that way than other ways.
Great, thank you, Drew. And we're coming up to the top of the hour and want to be sensitive to everybody's time. So I want to thank all of our panelists. It's been a pleasure talking with you. Your experience and expertise and vision for where this industry is going is really compelling. And thank you very much for sharing your expertise with the audience. And for our audience, thank you for your engagement and their questions. And if you like this kind of information, I'll just remind you again that this webinar is in partnership with the Connected Insurance Conference. And so, plan to attend and you'll get a lot more of the same. So thanks everybody for joining us today, and thanks again to the panelists.
Thank you.
Thank you.